Okay, this is the Gemara, Daf 25, Avodah Zarah, Daf 25. This is for July 13th, 2025. I'm back on track. So, in the last video, Daf 24, I gave it a little bit of a controversial title topic of whole world will convert. So that is the position of the Tana, and you cannot argue with the Tana. Only a Tana can argue with a Tana. Of the high-level Tana, Rabbi Eliezer. So his position is that the whole world will convert. And it's very interesting because you also have a statement that's plastered all across the Gemara in multiple places that in the days of Mashiach, we will not accept converts. But the question is, what does that stuff all actually mean? Because in the days of David and Solomon, we didn't accept converts either. But it also says that there were many converts. So, number one, that shows you that the so-called establishment cannot stop conversion. That's one. And the problem is what they do today is not halakhic. We'll say that some people do today is not halakhic, the majority. And also, I want to mention this. I like to point it out all the time, that it says in Sanhedrin that what empowers Amalek, it is whenever they turn away converts. When converts are turned away, it empowers Amalek. Amalek is the historic, antithesis of Israel. It is our arch enemy. So, anyway, continuing with Daf 25, get out of that controversy for a little bit. The Gemara cites a series of expositions with regard to what is called the book of Yashar. The verse states, "And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed until the nation had avenged themselves of their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Yashar?" Joshua 10:13. The Gemara asks, what is the book of Yashar? Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says, this is Genesis, which is the book of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were called righteous, or Yasharim, as it is stated, "Let me die the death of the righteous," or Yasharim. Numbers 23, verse 10. The Gemara asks, and where is it alluded to in Genesis that the sun would stand still for Joshua? The verse states in reference to Ephraim, who was Joshua's ancestor, it says, quote, "And his seed shall become a multitude of nations." Genesis 48:19. The Gemara asks, when will he become a multitude of nations? He became a multitude of nations at the time when the sun stood still for Joshua, as it is written, quote, "And the sun stayed in the midst of heaven and hastened not to go down for an entire day." Joshua 10:13. The Gemara inquires, and how much time elapsed before the sun finally set? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said that it took 24 hours. It traveled across the sky for 6 hours and stood still for 6 hours, and again traveled 6 hours and stood still for 6 hours, so that the entire matter lasted the duration of an entire day. Rabbi Eliezer said that it lasted 36 hours. The sun traveled for 6 hours, stood for 12 hours, and again traveled 6 hours and stood for 12 hours, so that the accumulated time of its suspension was that of an entire day. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said 48 hours elapsed before it set. It traveled 6 hours and stood for 12 hours, and then traveled 6 hours and stood for 12 hours, as it is stated, "And the sun stayed in the midst of heaven, and hastened not to go down for an entire day." By inference, it can be understood that initially it was not suspended for an entire day. Rather, it stood still for 12 hours, and was later suspended for an entire day. It's interesting because that's how you tell time, is by the sun. So if the sun stands still, there's an argument as to how long was that time. So there are those who say that these sages do not disagree over how much time it elapsed before the sunset. Rather, they disagree with regard to the additional time by which the day was extended. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said 24 hours were added to that day. Before the sun traveled 6 hours and stood 12 hours, and again traveled 6 hours and stood for another 12 hours, which meant that its standing time lasted for an entire day. So Rabbi Eliezer said that 36 hours were added. It traveled 6 hours and stood for 12 hours, and then traveled 6 hours and stood for 24 hours. It is with regard to the second suspension that the verse states, "And hastened not to go down for an entire day." So Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said, the time the sun stood in place for 48 hours in total, the sun traveled 6 hours and stood 24 hours, and then traveled another 6 hours and stood for another 24 hours. This reasoning is that the verse juxtaposes the sun's suspension to its motion. Just as the sun is in motion for an entire day, so too its suspension was for an entire day. It is taught, just as the sun stood still for Joshua, so too the sun stood still for Moses and for Nakdimon ben Gurion. It is known that it stood still for Joshua from a verse, and it is known that it stood still for Nakdimon ben Gurion from tradition. So, just a side note here, Nakdimon ben Gurion, possibly mentioned by Josephus, whose Hebrew name was Boni, is described in several sources as one of the wealthiest residents of Jerusalem at the time of the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. Rashi explains that it was the miracle referred to here is the episode related in Tractate Ta'anit 19b, in which Nakdimon prayed for the sun to continue shining after it should have set in order to allow him to repay a loan that was due by the end of the day. Okay. From where do we derive that it stood still for Moses as well? The Gemara answers, it is derived from means of a verbal analogy between the terms I will begin and I will begin. The Gemara elaborates, it is written here with regard to Moses, I will begin to deliver the dread of you and the fear of you upon the earth, Deuteronomy 2:25. And it is written there with regard to Joshua, I will begin to magnify you, Joshua 3, verse 7. Rabbi Yochanan says, it is derived from a verbal analogy between the words delivered and delivered. It is written here with regard to Moses, I will begin to deliver the dread of you, and it is written with regard to Joshua, in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. Joshua 10, verse 12. Okay, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said that there is no need for a verbal analogy, as you can learn this idea from the verse itself. This day will I begin to deliver the dread of you and the fear of you upon the peoples that are under the whole heaven, who, when they hear the report of you, shall tremble and be in anguish because of you. Deuteronomy 2:25. When was the fulfillment of the prophecy that all the nations shall tremble and be in anguish because of you? It was at the time when the sun stood still for Moses. The Gemara raised an objection. After the sun stood still, the verse states, and there was no day like that before it or after it. Joshua 10:14. If there was no day comparable to it, how can it be asserted that the sun stood still for Moses as well? The Gemara answers, if you wish, say that the number of hours the sun stood still for Moses were not as many as in the case of Joshua. And if you wish, say instead, when the sun stood still for Moses, there were no hailstones, whereas in the case of Joshua, there were hailstones, as it is written. And it came to pass, as they fled from before the children of Israel, while they were in the descent of Beth Horon, that the Lord cast down great stones from heaven upon them into Azekah, and they died. Okay, the Gemara cites another exposition with regard to the book of Yashar. It is written, quote, and said, to teach the sons of Judah the bow, behold, it is written in the book of Yashar, 2 Samuel 1:18. The Gemara again asks, what is the book of Yashar? Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says, this is the book of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who were called righteous, or Yasharim. As it is written with regard to them, let me die the death of the righteous, or Yasharim, and let my end be like his, Numbers 23, verse 10. The Gemara further analyzes the verse in Samuel. And where is it alluded to in Genesis that Judah must be taught to use the bow? The verse states, Judah, your brother, shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the nape of your enemies. Genesis 49, verse 8. The Gemara explains what is the form of warfare that requires one hand to be held opposite the nape. You must say that this is referring to the use of a bow. This is the referent of the verse in Samuel. The Gemara cites a different interpretation. Rabbi Elazar says that the book of Yashar is the book of Deuteronomy. And why did they call it the book of Yashar? As it is written, and you shall do that which is right, or Yashar, and good in the sight of the Lord, Deuteronomy 6:18. And where is it alluded to in Deuteronomy that Judah must be taught the use of the bow? The verse states, in this for Judah, and he said, hear, Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him in unto his people. His hand shall contend for him, Deuteronomy 33, verse 7. What is the form of warfare that requires the use of two hands? You must say that this is referring to the use of a bow. This is the referent of the verse in Samuel. So the Gemara provides another explanation. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says that the book of Yashar is the book of Judges. And why do they call it the book of Yashar? As it is written, in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right, or Yashar, in his own eyes. Judges 17, verse 6. And where is it alluded to in Judges that Judah must be taught the use of the bow? The verse states, only that the generations of the children of Israel might know to teach them war. Judges 3, verse 2. What is the form of warfare that requires teaching? You must say that this is referring to the use of the bow. This is the referent of the verse in Samuel. The Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that Judges 3:2 is written in reference to Judah? We derive it as it is written, the fight against the Canaanites, the fight against them. The Lord said, Judah shall go up. Judges 1, verses 1 and 2. The Gemara cites another dispute between the name Amoraim. The Gemara cites another dispute between the same Amoraim. The verse states, and the cook took up the thigh, and that which was upon it, and set it before Saul. 1 Samuel 9:24. To what does the term, and that which was upon it, refer? Rabbi Yochanan says it refers to the thigh and the tail. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that the tail is referred to as and that which was upon it? The reason is that the thigh supports the tail as it rests upon it. So, and Rabbi Elazar says the verse refers to the thigh and the breast. And what is the reason that the breast is referred to and that which was upon it? The reason is that one places the breast upon the thigh when it requires sacrificial waving and waves it. And Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says the verse refers to the thigh and the kap, or the sophi, the very top part of the leg. What is the reason that the cap is referred to as, quote, and that which was upon it? It is because it is referring to the cap that stands upon the thigh. The Mishnah teaches that a woman may not seclude herself with Gentiles. The Gemara asks, what are we dealing with? If we say that we are dealing with a woman who secludes herself with one Gentile, is it permitted in the corresponding situation involving a Jew? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah, Kedushin 80, verse 80b, one man may not seclude himself even with two women. It is certainly forbidden for one man to be secluded with one woman. Rather, the Mishnah is referring to a case in which a woman secludes herself with three Gentiles. The Gemara asks, is this permitted in corresponding situation involving Jews steeped in immorality? But didn't we learn in a Mishnah, Kedushin 80b? But one woman may be secluded with two men. And Rav Yehuda says, that Shmuel says, they taught this halacha only with regard to men of fit morals. But with regard to those steeped in immorality, she may not be secluded even with 10 men. There was an incident where 10 men carried a woman out of the city on a briar as though she were dead, and they engaged with her. The Gemara answers, no, the ruling of the Mishnah here is necessary in a case where the Gentile's wife is with him. And the differences between the two rulings is that in the case of a Gentile, it is assumed that his wife does not guard him against sinning with another. But with regard to a Jew, his wife does guard him against sinning with another. The Mishnah teaches that a woman may not seclude herself with a Gentile due to the concern that they might engage in illicit relations. The Gemara challenges, and let us drive that a woman may not seclude herself with a Gentile due to the concern about bloodshed. The Gemara cites two responses. Rabbi Yirmiyah says we are dealing with a distinguished woman, so whom Gentiles will not kill, as they are fearful of her status. Nevertheless, there is a concern with regard to illicit relations. Rabbi Idi bar Avin says a woman carries her weapons upon her. So in other words, there is no need to be concerned that a woman might be killed by Gentiles. Rather, the very fact that she is a woman protects her, as they would most likely rape her and not kill her. So the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between these two answers? The Gemara answers, the difference between them is with regard to a woman who is distinguished among men due to her political position, but is not distinguished among women, that is, she is unattractive. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, there is no concern that she will be killed, as she is distinguished, nor is there concern that they will engage with her. Therefore, it would be permitted for her to seclude herself with them. By contrast, as Rav Idi bar Avin stated his explanation in general terms, he evidently holds that the concern of illicit relations always applies regardless of the woman's appearance. Okay, the Gemara notes that it is taught in Braita, in accordance with the opinion of Rav Idi bar Avin, with regard to a woman, even though her protection occupies her, that is, she is not in danger of being killed, she may not seclude herself with Gentiles because they are suspected of engaging in forbidden relations. The Mishnah further teaches that a person may not seclude himself with Gentiles because they are suspected of bloodshed. The sages taught, a Jew who encounters a Gentile on the road and continues his travels with him should position the Gentile to his right so that the Jew's dominant hand is closest to the Gentile, which will enable him to defend himself against a potential attack. Okay. Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, says, if the Gentile is armed with a sword, the Jew positions him to his right, because a blade is usually carried on one's left side. But if the Gentile is armed with a stick, the Jew should steer him to his left, as a stick is usually carried on one's right hand. By walking on the same side as the Gentile's weapon, the Jew can best prevent him from drawing it. All right. The Gemara continues, if the Jew and a Gentile were ascending an incline or descending a decline, the Jew should not be positioned below while the Gentile was above. So the Gentile will not have the advantage of height if he decides to attack. Rather, the Jew should be located above while the Gentile is below. And the Jew should not bend down before him, lest the Gentile break his skull. Furthermore, if the Gentile asks him where he is going, the Jew should extend the journey when relating his destination to him. That is, he should claim that he is traveling to a place beyond his actual destination, in the manner that Jacob our father did to the wicked Esau. As it is written that Jacob said to Esau, let my Lord pass over before his servant, and I will journey on gently, according to the pace of the cattle that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come unto my Lord unto Seir. Genesis 33:14. The Gemara continues, and it is written subsequently, and Jacob journeyed to Sukkot, and built himself a house. Genesis 33:17. Rather than meeting Esau in Seir, Jacob traveled to the nearer location of Sukkot. Telling a Gentile that one is traveling to a farther destination might cause the Gentile to defer his attack due to the assumption that he has a longer period of time to plan and execute. As a result of the delay, the Jew has a better chance of reaching his true destination safely. The Gemara illustrates this idea. Through a relevant story. An incident occurred involving several students of Rabbi Akiva who were traveling to Kaziv. Along the way, bandits encountered them and said to them, where are you going? Rabbi Akiva's students said to them, to Akko. Once they reached Kaziv, Rabbi Akiva's students separated from the bandits. At this point, the bandits said to them, whose students are you? The students said to the bandits, we are students of Rabbi Akiva. The bandits said to them, fortunate are Rabbi Akiva and his students, as they were never harmed by an evil person. The bandits were impressed with the wisdom that the students demonstrated in evading harm. The Gemara relates another incident. Rav Menashe was traveling, and that is the end of Daf 25.